This also explains why the way we find in the Torah that the Hashem told him to fight the enemy was very different, because the klipa was different. So the instructions how to fight the klipa was also different. Just to give an example, when the Yidden were fighting with Amalek, what did Hashem say to do? Moshe should go on the top of a mountain, and he should raise his hands, and as long as his hands is raised high, they'll be winning the war. If he lowers his hands, then the other side will win. We don't find this by any other war. When they had to conquer Yericho, what did they do? What was the miracle then? They circled the city 7 times, and then the walls just collapsed. You don't find this with other times. And in Purim, what does it say? It doesn't say that Purim was fighting Haman. It doesn't say that Mordechai said everybody should lift their hands. He said to gather 22,000 children and learn Torah with them, and that's what defeat Haman. So the reason why every time we find something different is because it was a different klipa that we had to overcome, and therefore it had to be something in Kedusha that'll fight that particular klipa. And it's always different. Actually, even though this is Chassidus and Kabbalah, but the truth is that there's a pasuk in Chumash that pretty much says it also. What am I talking about? There's a pasuk in Devarim where Hashem says to Moshe, "You saw that I gave the nation of Amori in your hands." So Rashi says, "What do you mean you saw? It didn't happen yet." So Rashi says, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu he should take the angel in Shamayim that's in charge of this nation, and he should put his foot on the angel's neck and basically overpower him. And then, once he overpowers and defeats the angel up there, then down here they're going to be defeated. So clearly, what it's saying is that the real war is on a spiritual level. So when it comes to Chanukah, it's the same thing, that there was a Golus, and the Golus was the Golus of the Yevonim, the Greeks, and there was a miracle that we were able to defeat them and get back our Beis Hamikdash. Then there was a miracle with the candles. But what really was going on here, the Yevonim, they personify and they embody a certain klipa. And the war was against that klipa. And that klipa, even though the Yevonim of old don't exist anymore, but the klipa still exists. Instead of there being one nation that has that klipa, we all have that klipa within ourselves. And when it comes to Chanukah, that's the time that we have to focus on that and get rid of that klipa. And we do it through learning about Chanukah and doing the mitzvahs, the customs, and the laws that pertain to Chanukah. So the question is, what is the klipa of Chanukah? So we see an interesting thing when it comes to Chanukah, a number of things which are very unusual. Number one is that the Babylonians, when they wanted to defeat us, what did they do? They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. The Romans, when they wanted to defeat us, what did they do? They also destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. The Yevonim didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash was standing, but they took control of it, and they did things the way they wanted. And they used the Mizbeach, and they sacrificed pigs on the Mizbeach. Why was it different? How come they didn't do the same thing like the other nations did? They knew that this is our strength. This is new. They knew that this is where we get our power from. So they wanted to take over. They should have, God forbid, destroyed it just like the other ones did. Another question is, we know that in Torah, the right side always takes preference over the left, in reference to a lot of halachas, a lot of customs. When it comes to Chanukah menorah, the mitzvah is dafka to put it on the left side of the doorpost. We know that, you probably learned this in halacha, that some people have a custom to light the menorah by the window. Chabad has the custom to light it by the doorpost. The original mitzvah, the way it was when it was originally established, was to light the menorah outside in the street by the doorpost. So which side of the doorpost? Dafka the left side. Usually things in Torah always dafka the right side. Here it's dafka the left side. Another question is that we hardly find anything in Torah that the mitzvah, the place to perform the mitzvah is in the street. Either we have mitzvahs that we perform in the house, or we have mitzvahs that we perform in the Beis Hamikdash, or we have mitzvahs that we perform in the shul. Which mitzvahs do we have that they do them outside in the street? There was one other thing that was done dafka outside, and that was the para aduma. The red heifer was supposed to be sacrificed, and the animal was burned outside of the Beis Hamikdash, dafka. But other than that, all mitzvahs are either in the house, in the Beis Hamikdash, or in the shul. Not in the street is not a place to do mitzvahs. The menorah of Chanukah is dafka to do it in the street. Another question where we find it's strange is that the Chanukah menorah is to remind us of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. So I would imagine that in many ways it's similar to the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Instead, what do we see? The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash had to be lit dafka before nightfall. Besides the fact that it was lit inside the Beis Hamikdash, not only inside the Beis Hamikdash, there are many chambers in the Beis Hamikdash, and we know that the more outer it was, and we'll put it the other way, the more inner it was, the more holiness to it. The Kodesh HaKadoshim was the holiest. Then there was the place where there was the menorah, the Mizbech HaKtoras, and the Shulchan, the table. That was the second to the holiest place in the Beis Hamikdash. So besides the fact that the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash was in the innermost chamber, and the menorah of Chanukah is all the way outside in the street, not just in an outside chamber. Besides that, the Chanukah menorah is really dafka after dark, and the menorah of Beis Hamikdash was lit dafka during the day before dark. So how do we explain all these differences? Also, on the booklet, in the beginning of the booklet, we don't have enough time to do the whole thing. Some years I just learned the whole thing inside. You open up the booklet on page 3 and 4, rather 4 and 5, and also 6. Yeah, that's the Gemara. It's interesting. There's no Gemara on that's called Chanukah. There's a Gemara that's called Megillah. That's all about Purim. There's a Gemara that's called Tzachim, it's all about Pesach. A Gemara that's called Shabbos, all about Shabbos. And there's a Gemara called Rosh Hashanah, all about Rosh Hashanah. But there's no Gemara called Hanukkah. But there is a place in Gemara, this is sort of the source of what we know about Hanukkah, and that is in the Gemara of Shabbos. So I want to draw your attention to something that it says here. And that is on page 6. Look at page 6. The middle of the page, it says the Gemara reveals the origin of the holiday of Chanukah. You see that? There's another booklet here if anybody wants, another 2 maybe. Another 1. So the Gemara says, our rabbis taught. There was my Chanukah. What is Chanukah? Which means, which is the miracle that they established Chanukah for? Our rabbis taught on the 25th day of Kislev, which is today, the days of Chanukah are 8 days. And it's a yontif, which means on these days, not permitted to eulogize, to fast. Then it goes on to explain why they established the yontif. Remember, Chanukah was during the second Beis Hamikdash. And these were the sages at that time that they decided to make this into a yontif. When the Greeks went into the Beis Hamikdash, Timu kol hashmana shebeheichel, they made all the oil tamid. And when the Chashmonaim overcame them and they defeated them, they searched for oil. But they couldn't find only one little small jug of oil. And this jug of oil they knew was pure because it had Chesamish of Kohen Gadol, they had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. There was only enough oil for one day. There was a miracle with Likum and Shmeini Yomim, and it lit for 8 days. And after that, Kavul Wasam Yom Tevin, they dedicated this day, they designated the day as a Yom Tov, to praise Hashem for the miracle. So here there's also another question. There was another miracle, which in a way is even a bigger miracle, and not only that, that's the main miracle, and that is that they won the war. How could they go into the Beis Hamikdash and even try to look for oil to light the menorah, as long as the Yevanim are in control? So the first miracle is that they defeated the enemy. Now they can go into the Beis Hamikdash, and now there's another miracle to light the oil. So Chanukah was not established for the miracle that they defeated the army, even though that was a big miracle. And how do we know that it's a big miracle? Because it says that it was a small group of people that were able to defeat thousands and thousands of trained soldiers. And how many people? Here it doesn't say in the Avanissim, as we'll soon see, but in Rashi and Chumash it says there were 12 people from the Chashmonaim and their family. 12 people who were not trained soldiers should defeat an army. There was no question, an open miracle. But let's look at Halanissim, number 7, page 7. So this is what you say in benching, this is what you say in davening. It says in days of Matasyo, this and this, and it says, you handed over the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous. So basically, the miracle was that a few people could defeat an army of hundreds of thousands, or tens of thousands of people. So how come the nest wasn't established for that? At least it'd be that and the 8 days of Chanukah, the oil. No, why did they make them Yantiv? Because of the oil. The main thing was the oil. There's a lot of questions, but hopefully all these questions will lead us to an answer. I'm not asking the question just to confuse you. And there's another question. Chanukah, there's no mitzvah to eat a meal. You know why? Because you're so full from the latkes, there's no room for a meal anymore. No, the donuts and the latkes. Basically, every Yom Tov there's a mitzvah to eat a meal. Rosh Hashanah, such a holy day, mitzvah to eat a meal. Pesach, a mitzvah to eat a meal. And Shavuos is a mitzvah to eat a meal. And Purim, of course, there's a mitzvah to eat a meal. And in fact, Chanukah and Purim are similar because they're both Yom Tovim that the Chachamim established. It's not in the Torah. So in many ways they're similar, but here they're not similar. Purim, it's a mitzvah to eat a meal, and on Chanukah, there's no mitzvah to eat a meal. So the reason I've given is that Purim was a time that the enemy, who was Haman, his intention was, Rahman al-Islam, to destroy Yidden Begashmis. He just wanted every single Jew, men, women, children, young and old, wiped off the map. That was his plan. That was his desire. In the time of Chanukah, it wasn't a war to destroy the Yidden physically, but it was a war to destroy the Yidden spiritually. In fact, many of the people that were fighting this war were actually Jews who sided with the Yevanim, but these were the assimilated Jews. And they were from the Tzedukim, those that didn't believe in the oral Torah or in the written Torah. They became enemies of the Purim Jews, and they worked together, unfortunately, together with those that were against the Jews. And therefore, the war was a spiritual war. They were trying to bring Yidden to give up in Yiddishkeit. So because it was a spiritual war, therefore we celebrated mainly in a spiritual way, which is lighting candles. Purim, which is a physical threat, We celebrate it mainly by eating a physical meal. That's the answer that's given. But now we'll go into a little bit more detail. What was the spiritual war about? Like I said before, even spiritually, every time in history and every yontif was a different kind of a klipa. What was the klipa of Yevanim? And once we understand that, all these different questions will sort of fall into place. So the answer is based on the words in Alanissim. So turn to page 7 now. Alanissim, it's a very small little prayer, but in this prayer, we actually describe what Chanukah is all about. And it says like this: B'mei Matisyahu ben Yechon Kohen Gadol, in the age of Matisyahu, he was the son of Yechanan, who was the high priest. Hashmonai, he was from a family called Hashmonaim. He and his children, Amda, they stood up. Kishamda, when Malchus Yavna Shah, when the evil kingdom of the Greek stood up, Alamcha Yisrael, against your nation, Lashkicham Terasecha, to make them forget your Torah, make them go away from your commandments. So you see it's underlined here, and the reason why we underlined it is Chassidus makes the emphasis on these two words. It doesn't say to make them forget Torah. It says to make them forget your Torah. And the next line it says that he made them, they wanted them to move away from your will and your chukim. Which means specifically the war was against chukim. We know that there are three kinds of mitzvahs. There's mitzvahs that are called mishpatim. These are the mitzvahs that are purely logical. And even if chas v'shalom we wouldn't have received the Torah, we would understand logically that it's immoral to kill, to steal, and to do other things because it's just not, it doesn't make any sense. It's not moral. But then there are mitzvahs that initially, had the Torah not been given, we wouldn't know to do it. But once the Torah was given, and we see these mitzvahs, we can understand the logic behind it. Let's say eating matzah on Pesach. We wouldn't know that you have to eat matzah on Pesach. But Hashem says eat matzah on Pesach to remember the miracles of Pesach, then we can understand it. Makes sense. Eat in a sukkah in order to remember the miracles that happened when we went out of Mitzrayim, that makes sense. And the same thing with other things. Shabbos, to remember that Hashem created the world. But then there's a third category of mitzvahs that had the Torah not been given, we wouldn't have understood it. And even after the Torah was given, we still don't understand it because there's no logic behind it. We can't understand why you're not allowed to wear shatnez. Wool and linen together. Wool is kosher, linen is kosher, but together it's not kosher. Why? All the laws of this makes a person pure, this makes a person impure. If you have a mikveh that has 40 saw, the person becomes pure. If it's not exactly like that, if it's this kind of water, that kind of water, all these halachas, we know there's halachas in the Torah, but we can't wrap our head around it. It doesn't make any sense. Why? So these are called chukim. So here it says that specifically and primarily, the Yevanim tried to get us to uproot the observance of chukim. And the reason for that is the clip of Amalek was, not Amalek, but Yevanim. Yevanim were known as, they were into philosophy, and they were intelligent people, and that's why they were known as big philosophers. And in a sense, that was their idol that they worshiped. They worshiped intellect, like some people today. They worship intellect, and to them, doing anything that makes sense, fine, this makes sense to me, this makes sense to you, but as long as you're doing that. And therefore, if Yidden would study Torah, because intellectually it's brilliant, intellectually it's very exciting, intellectually it's very challenging, that's fine. But what they were against more than anything else was that we shouldn't be focused and we shouldn't be accepting the holiness and the godliness that's in Torah. In other words, what we know the truth is that Torah is, yes, is Chokhmah, is intellect. Not only Chokhmah, it's Hashem's intellect, so it's the most brilliant Chokhmah in the world. But the Chokhmah in Torah, the intellect in Torah, is only a capsule. There's something in it that's much greater than the Chokhmah that's in Torah. And what is in it? In it is Hashem's presence. And when you learn Torah, you're embracing Hashem. And you're connecting to Hashem. And Hashem is beyond intellect. In fact, He created intellect. So that means that if a person would learn Torah, do mitzvahs, follow different things, because intellectually they understand that this is the right way to do things, they wouldn't have had an issue with that because, okay, they were very much into culture. That's your guys' culture. But accepting the fact that there's something higher than intellect, something which is considered holy and above intellect and above nature and above the world, that to them was unacceptable. And that's what they tried. That's what this Klipa, I'm not talking about the people, but the Klipa wanted to uproot that. So this is what was reflected in the way they attacked us. They didn't destroy the Beis Hamikdash, which means they would allow the structure of the Beis Hamikdash to be standing. What did they do? If you look at the words again, it says they made all the oil tamei. What happens when you make something tamei? You don't see any difference. It looks exactly, look at the tamei oil and look at the not tamei oil, look exactly identical. You see no difference. And if you look at it with a microscope, you still wouldn't see a difference. And if you have a scientist analyze it, you still wouldn't see a difference. So what is the difference? This has tumah in it, the opposite of kedusha, and this is something which doesn't have any tumah in it. Tumah and kedusha is something which you can't really see. It's not a difference in the actual structure, but it means that there's something holy and something deep inside it. And the same thing here. They would allow us to learn Torah and do mitzvahs which make sense and there's logic behind them. But the holiness and the godliness in it, which is what really motivates us to do the mitzvahs, that's the part that the Klippa didn't want us to be connected to. And that's why they were mainly against chukim. So that explains why the war against Yidden was reflected in this way, that they did not destroy the Beis Hamikdash, they just made everything tummy. That was their thing. They made everything in the tummy, which means you can do this, that, and the other thing, but don't focus on kedusha, something in it which is godly and higher than just intellect. In fact, oil is always connected to kedusha. For example, in the Chumash, when it tells them that when they build the Beis Hamikdash, when they build the Mishkan, and even later in the future, they had to sanctify everything that's being used in the Mishkan. How do you sanctify it? Pouring oil on it. Oil was a symbol of holiness. The Kohen Gadol, or the Kohen, how did they sanctify him? They poured oil on him. A king, how did you show that he's a king under Hashem's rule? Poured oil. Mashiach, that's why Mashiach is called Mashiach. Mashiach means Mashiach means anointed one. What does anointed mean? That they poured oil on his head. So the oil is always what represents kedusha and holiness. And that's the part that they were sort of attacking, and that's the part that they wanted to get rid of. So this is a different kind of klipa than other klipas which wanted to uproot actual mitzvahs. This is a klipa that just wanted to extract and not allow us to have the neshama of the mitzvah, which is the godliness. And that's why the way we celebrate Yom Tov is also not so much through physical eating. Again, of course we have meals and people get together, they have parties, but it's not a chiyuv, it's not part of the chiyuv of the mitzvah. If you remember Purim, they always tell you there's 5 different things you're obligated to do. It's supposed to listen to the Megillah, say Al Hanisim, send Shalach Manas, give tzedakah, and one of the 5 things is you have to have a meal. But Chanukah, there's no mitzvah to have a meal, because Chanukah was a spiritual war, and the spiritual war is celebrated in a spiritual way, which is through the menorah, through the oil, and through thanking Hashem and praising Hashem for the miracles. The Rebbe's father, Rabbi Yitzchak, writes in one of his insights that the difference between Chanukah and Purim is similar to the difference between communism and Hitler's Shemot. Hitler wanted what Haman wanted. He wasn't into something spiritual. He just wanted to wipe off the map, God forbid, every single Jew, men, women, and children. That there should be nothing left. Communism, as you know, not only wasn't out to get rid of the Jews, but one of the people who established communism was a Jew, and then there was a whole section of Jews among the communists that were called Yevsektia. These are the ones who led the war against the Frierdiker Rebbe more than anyone else. So these were actually assimilated Jews and assimilated ideas, and they had all these crazy ideas of making Jews become part of the country and not be different than everybody else. So he writes that what happened with communism is very similar to what happened in times of Chanukah. And what happened in Germany is very similar to what happened in times of Purim. I have these tapes that I teach about the Yom Tovim, and someone came to this point, I made a mistake, which is I can't erase it because it's out there already. But I said that Chanukah is the gematria, what should we call it, something in communism, and Purim is the gematria something in with Haman, and I got so many calls, where's the gematria? It doesn't fit, what are the numbers? And it was a mistake. But he just writes so clearly how it's the same thing. I'm sure if we look hard enough, we'll find a gematria, but he doesn't say that. So if you ever hear that in my name, a disclaimer now is a mistake. But the idea that these two times are identical, the same idea, that's very clear. The previous generation, these were the two big challenges that Yidden had. One was Germany, and the other one was with Russia, with communism. So one was at Chanukah, the other one was like Purim. I just want to go a little bit into another point, and that is, so what's the right way to observe mitzvahs? Even this could be understood superficially, and could be understood on a deeper level, which means when it comes to observing mitzvahs, we say, no, we don't listen to the Yavana, we observe all the mitzvahs, although we do understand it, we don't understand. So what is the motivation for doing mitzvahs which we don't understand? If you ask someone who didn't study Chassidus, this will be their answer. We don't understand, but Hashem is much more brilliant than we are, and He understands. So we trust that Hashem knows the reason. So Chassidus explains, no, that's not the right way of observing Chukim either. Because basically what you're saying is, it has to make sense. Doesn't make sense to me, makes sense to someone else who's smarter than me. So it's like, for example, if you go to a doctor, and he tells you to take a certain medicine, I have no idea how it works, why it works, but I'm trusting the doctor. Does that mean I'm accepting something which is higher than my intellect? No. I'm accepting something which is intellectual, but I understand intellectually that a person who studied medicine for so many years and he has a lot of experience, he knows better than me that for this I should use the pink pill, the other thing I should use the green pill. Okay. But it's not that I'm surrendering my seichel to something that's higher than me. It's still me. I agree, my seichel agrees that this is a good thing. The true way to observe chukim is in a way that I'm surrendering my understanding and I'm recognizing that Hashem is above Seichel. That He created logic in the first place. I can't bind Hashem with logic because He created logic. Everything in logic could have made sense totally different. A banana could have been the most amazing thing in the world. Banana peel, by the way. Could have been the most amazing thing in the world. if Hashem would have created logic differently. So therefore, that means that the way we observe in that way is that it's not being based on seichel. And the reason why this is so important is two reasons. Number one, if it's based on seichel, I'm not really serving Hashem completely because Hashem is above seichel. And the second reason is that will make my observance ultimately limited. It'll still be limited by seichel. One of the reasons why we find that people went off, and the people that went off the path of Torah weren't necessarily, I'm not talking about people who went off the path of Torah because they didn't know what it's all about and they had the wrong kind of education. I'm talking about people who were brilliant people, Torah scholars, and yet they went off. And we're talking about even the reform movement that we know today, which as a result of that millions of Jews assimilated, was started by a Jew, the first one to start the reform movement, who was actually a religious Jew, and not only a religious Jew, but a Jew who knew Torah. Someone told me in books that talk about him, write that if he was sitting at a meeting with German dignitaries, he would stop in the middle and say, I have to step out to daven mincha. That's how frum he was in certain things. But his ideas were very, he had his own idea. I'm not sure exactly which things, but certain things he dismissed, especially anything that had to do with more spirituality, kedusha, these kind of things that he sort of laughed at, didn't believe in. And how could somebody like that mean that he understood Yiddishkeit from an intellectual perspective? So if it's intellectual, then he takes the intellect the way he understands it. And then you start moving off. And you move off a little bit, the next person moves off a little bit more. Or I myself, today I move a little bit, tomorrow I move a little bit off more, until Chas v'Sholom you move away completely. So whenever we find, like the Tzedukim, the people in the times of Beis Mikdash, that believed in the written Torah, but not in the oral Torah. The oral also weren't just people off the street. These are people who were scholars and intelligent people, and they created a movement based on their intelligence. So when Yiddishkeit is based on intelligence, it'll take me to a certain point. But if I'm really going to be challenged, everything is based on what I understand. So when I have a challenge and a lot of pressure, my seichel will lead me to Rahman al-Flan to do something which is not because I'm going against Torah, but because I'll understand that Hashem probably wants me to do it this way, or probably wants me to do it that way. It'll make sense to me not to do things the way I'm supposed to. Like, what do these people say? Probably Hashem wants the Torah to be changed now because the times have changed. And therefore we have a need for this, we have a need for that. So if a person accepts Torah mitzvahs from a place which is beyond logic, then we know that I can't go wrong. I just accept what Hashem says, whether I do understand or don't understand. But once my acceptance becomes based on logic, then I can easily, logic will lead me to a place which would satisfy me and not necessarily what Hashem really wants. And the thing that's strange about it is because there's so much emphasis in Torah about learning and understanding. That's what Torah is all about. Learn, understand, it should make sense, do everything, especially Chassidus, is even more so, to learn and understand and comprehend and really understand it deeply. And yet at the same time, we're saying that we have to go beyond our understanding. So there's a Gemara that says that this is the way the Yetzer Hara works. First, he tells you to do one thing, then he tells you to do another thing, and then he tells you to do a third thing, and eventually he tells you to go worship idols. So the simple pshat is that first the Yetzer Hara tells you to step away from Torah a little bit, then he tells you to step away from Torah another little bit, then eventually he tells you to go worship idols. Actually, there's a beautiful insight on today's Parsha Miketz. It says there were 7 good cows and 7 bad cows. So this is what it says in Chumash. If you look at the pasuk again, it says like this: the 7 bad cows came out of the water behind the 7 good cows, and then they stood next to them, and then they ate them up. So this is it. First they stand behind you. Yetzer Hara comes and says, "Could you let me in just for tonight? It's very cold out there. I just want to be there for one night." The next thing you know, I'm partner here. Like, you're not the only one that belongs to me and you. We're both, we own this place. And the next thing you know, he swallows you up and he takes over completely. That's a simple shot. But the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe repeat this a lot, says something even deeper. No, when it says, per the Yitzhara says, do this, it doesn't mean do an Avera. Do a mitzvah. He tells you to do a mitzvah. Tomorrow he tells you to do another mitzvah. So what's wrong? How can that lead to Avodah Zarah? Which means he tells you to do a mitzvah and tells you, it really makes sense, the mitzvah, because of this and this reason. It really makes sense to do that mitzvah because of this and this reason. He brings me to a place that I become sort of conditioned that the mitzvah has to make sense, and then I enjoy doing it. Once I become conditioned that a mitzvah has to make sense because I enjoy doing it, if something doesn't make sense to me, then my brain is resisting to accept it. So that means there's two things at the same time. On one hand, do everything you can to understand, but we have to remember the reason why we're doing everything we can to understand, because Hashem wants us to understand, not because I cannot accept Torah unless I understand it. That's the difference. It's a very subtle difference, but it's the whole difference. In one case, I'm understanding because Hashem is the one that wants me to understand it. In the other case, I'm making the effort to understand because I have a need to understand in order to accept it. And if that's the case, then when I don't have the ability to understand, I will resist accepting it. And then one thing leads to another. Yeah.
So is the point of the hooking a higher level of the mitzvahs, since you don't know and you do it for its own?
Yes. In fact, if you ask somebody, what would you enjoy more, doing a mitzvah that you understand the beauty and the depth of it, or doing a mitzvah that you have no clue why we're doing it? The average Jew will tell you, well, of course, the mitzvah that you understand, that you really have pleasure because you understand what you're accomplishing. A chassid will tell you, the greatest joy is doing a mitzvah I don't understand, because that I feel is Hashem. What I understand is more me than Hashem. When I don't understand, it's all Hashem. Okay, being that we're supposed to give out Chanukah to students, so I think everybody here got yesterday. Those that didn't get, Rivka, you didn't get, and you also didn't get. Yeah, well, you're a student. Today you're a student.
Okay.
And David, I know it's only $1, but you have no idea this dollar when you're going to use it. Yeah.
My life.
What, did you get Chanukah? Okay. I pray with the Chanukah, everybody.
Thank you.
To be continued.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.